Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. We're going to have some fun today figuring out how to go around our national governments when they don't cooperate in helping us to end global or control global warming, reduce global warming. And it's the really wonderful thing is that there are other polities in the world that are subnational. We have provinces and we have cities, smaller groupings. And I have two people today who are really making a difference in terms of solving the global issues having to do with climate change. One of them is David Miller, who is formerly the best mayor Toronto ever had, as far as I know. I certainly liked what he was doing when he was mayor. He went immediately from Toronto to C40 cities, which he ran for a while. And now he's still with C40 cities, but he's starting an institute on something like comparing Green New Deals of municipalities around the world. He'll explain because I don't really know what I'm talking about here. But at any rate, good morning, David Miller in Victoria. How are you?
Good morning, Meta. Thanks very much. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great. And we're going to have a conversation with another friend, David Hochschild, who is in the Bay Area. I don't know, are you at home or are you in San Francisco today, David?
I am at home. I'm in the East Bay in the Bay Area in Berkeley.
Yeah. Okay, great. Now I can say that David is I believe your title is something like the Commissioner of Energy for the state of California. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm chair of the California Energy Commission. We're a 750-person state agency focused on getting our state to 100% clean energy.
And so far as I know, the California system has done better than almost anybody in getting around the roadblocks that Trump put up. So I think that you two men are going to have a conversation between yourselves as you compare notes on how to accomplish local innovations that are very useful and very important for climate change reduction. So please feel free to talk between yourselves as if you were just getting acquainted in a bar someplace. And I will probably not intervene very much because I think what we want to hear is you comparing notes about how cities can make a difference and how provinces or states can make a difference, even in nations that are not particularly cooperating. So I can say a little bit about David Hochschild, only that I haven't seen much of you since you were a little boy, but I have known your parents since before they were married. So I know a little bit about your childhood, and I've been watching with admiration as you began struggling, even as a young man, working on climate change issues. So I want to thank you already for the work you've contributed, even in your lifetime so far. So good morning, and let's have David Miller. Would you please improve my introduction, because I didn't have a proper way of describing this institute that you are creating, and I think maybe that's a good starting point.
Sure. Thanks, Meta. And David, I'm very interested in California's work. I think you're world leading in a lot of ways, including some interesting political history around things like air quality and the fights that created the system that we have today. So I'm far from an expert, but very interested to learn more. Maybe it'd be helpful if I just give the thumbnail sketch of C40 cities. San Francisco and Los Angeles are members in California. Essentially, we're an organization of mayors of the world's greatest cities that have come together for the single purpose of helping the world avoid dangerous climate change. And the methodology is we use the voices and the actions of those mayors to help the world get on a better path. The membership consists at the moment of 97 cities. It was originally 40, hence the name. It was started by London Mayor Ken Livingstone in 2005, and Toronto was a founding member. I was one of the founding members. And it's grown since, but the basic criteria is still the same. You need to be a significant megacity, population of at least 3 million in the region. You have to have a leading climate plan, and the definition of that has changed over time as we've learned more from science. Essentially, today you need to have a climate plan that keeps your geographic area, not the city government, your geographic area on a 1.5 degree trajectory, i.e. your fair share of having emissions by 2030 on a path to net zero by 2050. And the other principle, in addition to using the voices and the actions of the mayors, is that we're half global north, half global south. So leading cities in our network would be Cape Town, Jakarta, several cities in China are doing very interesting work with us, as well as the ones you might expect from the global north, like London, Paris, New York, and of course Toronto. We've got to emphasize the Canadian cities. Toronto, for example, as a result of a climate plan that was brought in 2007, and the provincial government's closing of a coal-fired plant, is now 33% below 1990 levels of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's been over a 15-year period of an incredible economic boom. So interesting examples of what can be done. The current chair is Mayor Sadiq Khan of London, England. Immediate past chair is Mayor Eric Garcetti of Los Angeles, who was transformative, and he really centralized the idea that our role should be helping bring together the constituent parties to create kind of a global Green New Deal. So that was his philosophy. Sadiq agrees with it, but Sadiq's focus is now on, we've recruited last year about 1,000 cities, over 1,000, to live up to the same standards as these mega cities. And Sadiq's focus is on helping them undertake the actions that are needed, not just the climate plans. So it's a bit long-winded. My current role, effective January 1st, is, as Meta mentioned, building a new think tank, which we're calling the C40 Center for Urban Climate and Economy. So the idea behind it is we want to look at the economics. How do you structure the economic system in a way that ensures we can fight climate change and also help our mayors, both with a narrative about why they're trying to do these things and really good public policy examples of what works. So very long-winded introduction, but it's one of the reasons I'm quite interested in California, because we know what cities like Los Angeles are doing through its directly owned utility, the Department of Water and Power, and it'll be, I think, a completely clean grid by 2032, certainly by 2035. But it's interesting to me in the context of California. I'd love to hear you talk about how you are leading this change to renewables, which many jurisdictions get to a place and then sort of stop and say, well, we've got to keep the coal plant or we've got to keep the gas plant. California has a very interesting history about collective action on climate. And I'd love to hear you talk a bit about what you're doing, because I think it's quite relevant to what cities are trying to do, even though California is, the size of many countries.
Well, thank you, David. And first of all, congratulations on your amazing work. And C40 is a tremendous group. I'll just begin by saying I think there's some mythology about how change happens, that we tend to look at presidents and prime ministers as if they're kings and just make these decrees, and that's how things happen. But for the most part, with bold action, particularly on climate issues, nothing starts at the top. It all starts at the local level. And just to give you, one example, which is top of mind for me these days. So our agency, one of the responsibilities we have is we set the energy codes for new construction. So we've been driving towards really green, super efficient, energy efficient homes. And several years ago, we adopted the first mandate for solar on all new homes. We build about 100,000 new homes a year in California. That would not have been possible had not 7 cities in California gone out ahead, and we worked with those cities, but they adopted solar mandates on their own and kind of did the proof of concept and really made it. They created the conditions to where we could actually do a statewide mandate. So now solar standard on all new homes, and the Department of Energy has now recommended to what's called the International Energy Code body that sets these codes, that solar mandates be required now in that, which is huge. So that there's really a straight line from local leadership to state leadership to national and international. And I think that's the way to think about it, is our cities are laboratories for bold climate solutions. I actually come out of local government. I was in the San Francisco mayor's office under Willie Brown when he was mayor, when we had a blackout in 2001. It was a fun time for me in my career. I was just getting started, and I'll just share a funny story about Willie Brown. He was the only mayor of a major American city that I know of who kept his home phone number listed in the phone book. And so most major mayors don't do that. One day the streetlights went out at night. One individual streetlight went out, and someone called him at 3 a.m. to complain about that. And he took down the information, got it fixed. And the next day he set his alarm for 3 a.m, called it back and said it's fixed. So he had a great, it was a real treat to work for. I learned a lot from him. We had a much bigger lights going out problem a little later in the summer of 2001, when we had rolling blackouts throughout the state of California. And these were happening every day for several hours. Schools, stores, businesses, the power was just getting shut down. At that point, nobody understood what was going on. We now know that to be completely artificially created, emergency as a result of companies like Enron doing mischief.
Sorry, are you saying that somebody was actually deliberately causing this?
Yes. They were doing so-called scheduled maintenance all during peak demand times so that it would drive the price of energy way, way, way up because there'd be less supply, and then they'd make a lot of money. That was the game. And, they all got prosecuted, and there was huge penalties and so forth. And those problems have been addressed. But that actually got me going because we put together a $100 million bond initiative later that year to put solar panels on public buildings and to do energy efficiency. And that's how I got into the energy world 20 years ago. And I went on to start a nonprofit called Vote Solar, which is now 40-something staff working in 26 different states in the U.S. pushing for pro-solar policies, net metering, rate design, tax credits, interconnection standards, and the 100% clean energy statutes, which are now, I think, in 18 states in the U.S. And then from there, I went into the solar industry and then got appointed by Governor Jerry Brown to be an energy commissioner. We have 5 commissioners, and then I was appointed chair of the Energy Commission by Governor Newsom, I guess now 3 years ago. So a little bit of an overview of what's happening in California. We are all in on a clean energy future. I would say climate's the #1 priority in the state. For the last 3 years in a row, we've had the worst forest fires in the history of the state. I grew up here in the San Francisco Bay Area. We have never in my entire life had wildfire smoke in the Bay until 3 years ago, and now we've had it for 3 summers in a row. It's a health issue as well as a climate issue. And everybody on the West Coast of the United States who's lived through these fires and the smoke can tell you it's horrific and it's unprecedented. And so there's an incredible sense of urgency. I think there's been a real galvanization around our climate goals. And that has led to some incredibly bold action. I think the passage of SB 100 being one of the biggest, the requirement to get to 100% clean energy by 2045, and we're going to get there, I think, ahead of schedule. We're already today at almost 2/3 of our electricity coming from carbon-free sources, geothermal, solar, wind, hydro, et cetera. And then we're now in the fall going to be doing the first lease of offshore wind.
Can I ask?
Yes.
Can I ask about, you mentioned geothermal, which is a bit of a surprise to me. Is there much geothermal? I thought that was kind of a futuristic hope, but not really.
No, we have quite a lot of it, actually. So there's two big geothermal reserves in California. One of them is in Napa, about 2 hours north of San Francisco, and that's roughly a gigawatt in size, enough to produce enough power for a city like San Francisco. The Geysers is the name of that project. And then in the Salton Sea in Southern California, again, another couple gigawatts there, about a dozen or so geothermal power plants. And we'll be building more. So that is a nice resource, obviously, because it's a 24/7 resource. The solar and wind are intermittent. Mm-hmm. But the strategy here is really a portfolio of technologies. So we're not all in on solar, we're not all in on wind, we're not all in on hydro or geothermal, but also energy storage being a really key part of that. So we're adding more energy storage is getting installed in California than anywhere else in the world. We're adding, I think last year it was 2 gigawatts. That's enough for 2 San Franciscos, basically.
Hold on, wait a minute. Let me ask. You're talking about the storage.
Energy storage. So it's been principally.
What kind of storage is there?
So there's multiple types of energy storage. By far the dominant chemistry in energy storage is lithium ion technologies. That's the same battery that's in your cell phone, your laptop, your electric vehicle. That's also being used for stationary energy storage for the power sector. And so we have the largest energy storage project in the world is here, Moss Landing on the coast. But there's many other chemistries as well. So there's what they call flow batteries, vanadium, iron, chromium, and other chemistries there, as well as pumped hydro.
Well, that's what I was wondering. How much you're counting on things like the dam?
So we do have pumped hydro facilities. Helms is one of the big ones here. That's very expensive to build, but it is a resource, and there's a lot more coming. I mean, we have funded a bunch. One of the exciting things we do is we fund a bunch of next generation technology. So we have about $100 million a year, but more closer to $130 million a year that we're doing on research and development for next generation clean energy technologies. So we funded one to give you one example, a company called Form Energy, which is based here in Berkeley, founded by a former Tesla executive. And they have just now raised, we gave them a grant, but they've now raised, I think, $365 million in their latest round. They have a very, very low cost chemistry. It's an iron air technology, which is super inefficient. So it's typically like a lithium ion. It's about 85 or 90% round trip efficiency. So if you send it 100 kilowatts to charge, you'll get 85 or 90 back, right? Because you lose some in the. So this is much lower. This is like 50% efficient, but it doesn't matter because it's so much cheaper. And so they're scaling really fast. There's other chemistries as well coming. So energy storage is great because that's going to help us. We can then charge it with solar and wind, and then have it available for when there's constraints on the grid. So we're doing a big push there. I would say another big highlight in California has been transportation electrification. And one of the things that happened really in the middle of the wildfires, a year and a half ago, the governor did an incredibly bold thing of adopting this mandate that 100% of new vehicle sales by 2035 have to be zero emission and have to get us, so we're going all electric. And right now in California, we just have passed a big milestone, which is 1 million electric vehicles sold. And we're selling about 650 electric vehicles a day in the state of California. So big momentum on that. My agency now has $3 billion to deploy electric vehicle chargers all over the state. So we want to make it really easy to, when you have your cell phone, you never worry about where am I going to find electricity to charge the phone. It's not a question people ask because electricity is ubiquitous in the built environment. However, we're at the point now where the vehicles are on the market, but that is a gating item on adoption is, can I have confidence I can get, I can be able to recharge my vehicle? And so we want to answer that with a resounding yes and make EV charging everywhere happen. I think one thing that's helpful in that is that the range of electric vehicles is increasing. And the longer the range, sort of the less worry that drivers have. So our target is 1.2 million electric vehicle chargers. We're, I think, at about 80,000 now. So we got a long way to go, but we're rapidly building that out. So I'll give you a few other highlights of stuff that we're working on. Offshore wind, I mentioned, we just had a deal that we got done with the Biden administration. We tried unsuccessfully to do a deal with President Trump's administration and got nowhere, but we have a great partner in Washington, D.C. on this stuff now. And so that lease sale for the first offshore wind deployment in the West Coast is going to happen this fall. It'll be 375 square miles off the central coast of California. Interestingly, the offshore wind, the zone does not even begin until 20 miles offshore. So it really eliminates, some of the concerns you saw in the early projects, wind projects as close as a mile or 2 or 3 from shore. This is 20 miles, so just way out of sight, and it's an amazing resource. It's actually beautifully complementary to solar. In other words, offshore wind is up in the morning, comes down in the middle of the day, and then comes up in the afternoon and evening, just sort of yin-yang complement to solar. So that's been a big focus. I guess the other big one would be around what we're calling Lithium Valley, which is a vision to transition off of the oil economy onto a lithium economy. We have a massive lithium reserve in California. It's about a mile down below the Salton Sea in the very southern end of the state. And it's in an interesting form. It's lithium predominantly today comes from Australia and China, where it's in hard rock mining, or Chile and Argentina, where they have these massive evaporation ponds. The lithium in our resource is in a superheated geothermal brine. This is the same brine that they're now circulating to create geothermal electricity at these geothermal power plants, but it's a very mineral-rich brine. And so they've now developed a process to take the lithium out. So you take just 250 parts per million out of this brine, and the brine gets pumped back down. So it's by far the greenest way in the world to produce lithium, very small footprint, and it's a massive reserve. So the global market's about 430,000 tons. This reserve can produce 600,000 tons annually. When I say the global market's 400 and something this year, that is growing rapidly. So the market for lithium will be in just a few years, probably 2 million tons a year. But so we can produce it in this very, very green way. And we have major companies we're partnering with to do this, including Berkshire Hathaway and Controlled Thermal Resources and some others. And the vision is to bring back some of the missing pieces of the lithium ecosystem from China. We want to do battery manufacturing here domestically. Right now, most of it's happening in China. We have the largest end markets for electric vehicles and for energy storage in the United States. And we have the raw material, but we want the whole value chain here. So that's a big focus. And we want to do it in a way that's very intentionally providing benefits to low-income communities. And this region where the lithium exists is a very, very impoverished area, 27% unemployment rate in Imperial County, very high asthma rates. So that's, I think, kind of the strategy generally with our climate approach is try to lift up the communities.
One question about that fast train, which seems to be not very fast. I've heard that you can't use eminent domain and get the rights to put it through people's land or something like that. What's holding things up, and are you ever going to make it?
So no, they've already done, so all the right-of-way on the high-speed rail has already been acquired, to the best of my knowledge, and they've spent, I think, $3 or $4 billion now. It's under construction as we speak. It's a long route. We're a big state, so it's underway, but it is not a fast project. I absolutely believe that will get done. I think it's one of these mega projects that is going to outlive many governors. But no, it's underway, and there is a whole high-speed rail authority that's building that out. The section that's under construction right now is in the middle of the state, from Modesto south, I believe. The other thing that they're doing, because the vision is to connect San Francisco to Los Angeles, and this will be entirely electric service. So they are now in the process, in preparation for that, electrifying the service that does exist from San Francisco to Silicon Valley. So that, I think, will be done at the end of this year. But I think we're at least a decade away from high-speed rail being completed.
Thank you.
So it's really interesting, and I love the connection between ambitious political goals and creating the institutions that can really deliver. And I think from a city's perspective, that's a bit of magic that cities, at least the leading cities, can offer as well. And in fact, it's sort of the way C40 works. Our mayors will sign an ambitious declaration, but it's the institutions they create and the public service that actually deliver and make things work. And so what C40 does is we have peer-to-peer knowledge sharing networks that help cities learn from each other. So the process of innovation and innovative breakthroughs from a public policy perspective on climate can spread rapidly at scale. And I want to talk about that a bit because it's relevant to, I think, what you're doing in California. But I just do have to mention about the phones. I guess I'm not as adventurous as Mayor Brown. My phone number was unlisted.
Oh, right. Okay. Well.
However, I live on a street in Toronto that's essentially one block long. It's called Gothic Avenue, and it's called that because it's actually a Gothic arch on the map. It comes to a slight point. If you were on it, you'd think it was a semicircle, but it's actually a Gothic arch. And there's, I don't know, 20 houses on each side of the street. As it happened, when I was in office, there was another David Miller living in one of the other houses whose phone number was not unlisted.
So he got all the hate mail and all the calls.
When something happened, he got calls are unrepeatable even on a podcast when something happened, but he didn't think to call him back. And the poor guy eventually moved.
That is funny. That's funny. So, David, could I ask you a question? I'm just curious about. First of all, I think it's wonderful you have this exchange between cities. What would you say some of the most inspiring action that you're seeing today at the city level? What does that look like? Can you tell us a few of your top sort of success stories at the city level?
Yeah, great question, and absolutely. I think the nutshell is the heart of the climate plans of these cities, which are 1.5 degree compliant, and it's done through a sophisticated science process, is the fact that most emissions coming from the city area, whether or not they're directly under the control of the city is a separate thing, but most of the emissions coming from the city area or the hinterland that supports it are from how we generate electricity, how we heat and cool our buildings, how we manage our waste, and transportation. And so the breakthroughs that are happening typically are in one of those areas. And it's really fascinating to see the progress. A very good example is the electrification of public transport. So maybe 5 years ago, a subset of our mayors said, we got to have electric buses. Why don't we have electric buses? And the manufacturers said to us, you're a decade off. It's too soon. So we pulled together some cities through this peer-to-peer learning model to work on kind of common standards so we could go to the bus manufacturers and say, this is what we need. And Los Angeles, by the way, was quite instrumental in this early doors, 5-7 years ago, maybe. And there was a historic precedent for that, actually. It's not about climate, but about collaboration. the streetcars, trolley cars that were designed pre-war that you will know in San Francisco because it's the operating museum, the President's Conference cars that are painted in the liveries of different transit services. Those were called President's Conference cars because the presidents of all the transit authorities got together. They weren't happy with what the manufacturers were providing. This in the 1930s. They got together and said, here's the design we want. If you manufacture this, we'll buy it. And so, in a way, C40 used that. And we really drove hard to push the issue of electric buses. There were, I think, in the tens of electric buses operating in cities globally. Now there's over 66,000 just in C40 cities alone. Part of that is because of China. And Shenzhen, China has 16,000 of those. They've also electrified their taxi fleet. But what our model does is try to solve a problem somewhere and then take that idea and spread it. So we're now seeing, for example, in Glasgow at COP26 last year, we announced a private funding initiative who were setting aside, I think 5 funders, setting aside $1 billion to fund the acquisition of electric buses in Latin American cities. So it's targeted to Latin America. They have different ownership models there. It's complicated, but building from the peer-to-peer push with manufacturers to say this is what is needed, building on an opportunity because China was ahead of everybody else, that's now spreading globally. Similar things around building codes and building standards. Some cities have responsibility for building codes. This is really critical, but also the operation of buildings. In the bigger cities, the single biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, by bigger cities, I mean built up cities like New York as opposed to Houston, the biggest single source is how you heat and cool buildings. So New York City has a mandate, as you probably know, that requires larger commercial buildings, and that's where the bulk of the issue is, in the bigger buildings, for obvious reasons, to halve their emissions by 2030. Vancouver has a net zero building code that you've got new buildings will have to be built to net zero by 2030. And Oslo is leading a group of cities working on clean construction. How does the construction itself approach net zero? And there's lots of innovations, low carbon concrete by a Canadian company. I'll put a plug in for them called Carbon Cure, which injects carbon into concrete to make better concrete, but also as a kind of storage of the carbon. So there's a whole range of work being done there. And I think that part's very exciting because, buildings aren't as romantic to people as Teslas, but there is a huge importance in getting buildings right. And I liked what you said about how, you see the synergy between generating clean energy and building codes and how California sees these connect, because they do very much connect. So that a couple examples, much more going
great.
on, but
so I'd like to just respond to the building piece for a second. Then I had another question for you on electric vehicles. On the building side, totally with you. We really see it like new construction is essential to get right. It's like the first thing to do when you're stuck in a hole, stop digging, and the new construction piece matters a lot. So we're really driving towards all electric. Our code that we adopted in August is going to move us from about 2% of new construction being all electric to, I'm guessing, somewhere around 50% being all electric. And then the homes that are still built with gas will be using much less gas because we're requiring one of the major end uses, either water heating or space heating, to flip. And this is going to really, under the new code we adopted in August, it's now cheaper to build all electric than it is to build with gas. Because if you keep gas, we're also requiring a more powerful ventilation system, because indoor air quality has been a real issue, particularly in low-income households where they often have very cheap oven hoods that
Yeah.
don't ventilate very well, and so you have much higher NOx levels. So we have addressed that in this code. And then we're also requiring, for the first time, not in addition to solar, this new code we're doing is solar for all non-residential buildings as well. So the residential requirement we did 3-4 years ago is about 200 megawatts annually of solar. The non-res solar we just adopted this past summer is about 280 megawatts. So it's altogether, it's a gigawatt of solar every 2 years just from the code. And we're also requiring energy storage for the first time for commercial construction. I think so. If you can get new construction right, that can kind of help be an incubator for the industries that you need to scale to begin to do the retrofit market, because we want to be doing a lot of retrofits to get people off of natural gas. So in the governor's proposed budget, which was just released a few weeks ago, there's $1 billion for the Energy Commission just to do building decarbonization work and provide incentives for people to convert from gas to electric. So a big push on that. I did want to ask you one question I would love to hear your thoughts on. I'm very interested in the possibility to reduce costs for everybody by doing more master bids, where you bundle multiple cities. Everybody knows they need some number of electric transit buses or school buses, and you just do it under one big procurement, because all these manufacturers spend huge amounts of money on customer acquisition costs to go out and do the marketing outreach. If they can save on that, they can pass on those savings. I'm just curious, is that something that you've seen much with C40 trying to line up bids so people, because we've seen that happen with cities in California doing rooftop solar procurement, where they're getting like 15% savings by bundling, 20 different cities together for a bid. I'm just curious, are you seeing that with electric vehicles at all?
The international approach, because of different procurement rules, has been more to try to talk about standards. Mm-hmm. I believe LA did some of that in LA County around the procurement of electric buses, or if it hasn't done it, it's planning to. And from my perspective, it's a really good idea, but it would probably have to be within the same political entity, probably at the state or province level, rather than possibly at the national level.
That makes sense. Yeah.
We looked at this in Latin America. So instead of doing that, one of the things that's under consideration, because a lot of the public transit there is franchised, so it's owned and operated by a private operator. One of the things we're looking at there is having the finance companies create a model where people pay per kilometer for the bus, almost like a leasing model. And that way you can create, in essence, the same conditions as a common procurement, because it's the finance company financing in multiple places. But it's hard otherwise across jurisdictions just because of the procurement rules. And that, it's an interesting question, because we used to work pretty closely with the Clinton Climate Initiative, and the Clinton Foundation had done a ton of work on collective procurement of drugs for AIDS. So early doors wanted us to look at this, and you do run into that problem. But California, I think, is a leader in having groups of cities collaborate about procurement. It seems to be possible there. And in the U.S. context, Climate Mayors was trying to do this in a similar way, respecting the challenges of procurement with electric vehicles across cities in different states. And there's about 400 members of that. I don't think it's got very far, but they're having a look at it. I have a question for you, which is about the solar. I think it's quite brilliant to make it part of the code, and it's also brilliant to decarbonize future construction, and fully agree that then creates a way to move the retrofits farther and faster, although there's some issues there around equity and just transition we should probably talk about, which are top of mind to mayors. But my question about the solar is, a lot of our mayors get pushback about grid stability when they're trying to support rooftop solar, which is something they can do even if they don't have control over the utility. And can you talk a bit about how California is handling that? Sorry,
can I ask what grid stability means? I don't know what that is.
The electricity grids are set up. This is a layman's perspective. David will be able to say it professionally, but the grids are set up in a way where you have a few big plants that supply a whole network, and you need certain different amounts of electricity at different times of the day, and that gets adjusted by these big plants, which occasionally crashes. That's what a brownout and a blackout is. Mm-hmm. When you have a whole ton of small little plants like rooftop solar, if they have the ability to sell into the grid, which I guess should be my first question, David, can they sell back into the grid? It's a different kind of technique than having a few big plants because you got tons of little ones. And so you need to change the way the grid works to accommodate it. That's my understanding. And I'm a lawyer professionally and an elected official. If I got some of that wrong, I apologize. But that's my understanding of the issue a lot of our cities face and get pushback, particularly from private utilities, saying you can't do that. In the province of Nova Scotia right now, there's a hearing before their equivalent to the Public Utilities Commission, where they're wanting to charge people quite a large fee to connect with solar. And a different arm of the government had been subsidizing rooftop solar. It's a bit bizarre, but it's not uncommon.
Yeah, so look, the old model is no longer the way to think about it. The old model was you have electric demand, a factory turns on, and then some fossil fuel powered power plant cycles up to meet that need. What's happening now, and this is really the right way to think about it from my perspective, is that that's a little bit flipped on its head. And we have solar and wind being by far the cheapest resources in the world to create electricity. There's no fuel cost. They're super simple, right? They're just, they can be distributed, right? So we have almost 1.5 million rooftop solar energy systems in California. That's a good thing. That provides, by the way, a lot of resilience. You're not, subject to one big facility failing, right? Just as we have one nuclear power plant left in California, Diablo Canyon, and one of their units has had a lot of problems with hydrogen leaks. And it's been down 143 days since 2020. That's huge. It's a huge asset going offline. When you have distributed sources of energy, you actually are less subject to that. But I would say what's going to happen, and what already is happening, is that some of the load can be timed to when you have surplus renewables on the grid. Things like pre-cooling of buildings, charging of electric vehicles, and many other loads are actually, there's some degree of flexibility in there. So that's sort of a new thing. And in addition, customer demand response, electric demand is not this rigid thing that cannot change. Actually, we invest quite heavily in a program called Flex Your Power, which is designed in periods of very tight electric demand to get the message out to conserve. We always get significant reduction from that. So I would say demand response is a huge part of the energy strategy right now. And with respect to rooftop solar, it's unquestionably a good thing for the grid. We want people to have that. And it becomes even more valuable with energy storage. And that's what's happening. So in our state today, I would estimate about 20% of the solar panels that are getting installed with storage. People are having that backup. And I have storage I have rooftop solar and I have energy storage. And once actually we did have a blackout and I didn't notice because the storage backed up. So that kind of thing can actually then help not just for the individual, but also for the grid as a whole. Because I have my storage feed back to the grid, when there's a heavy need. And so I also would say rooftop solar, from my perspective, is sort of a gateway drug for a lot of other good things that we want people to do. That includes energy storage, but it also includes energy conservation. We know anecdotally that people who get solar start to pay a lot more attention to reducing their electric bill. And they're also more likely to then take the step of, for example, electrifying their homes and transitioning from natural gas to electric heat pump technology or getting an electric vehicle. So there's a lot of reasons why that's an important part of the strategy. It's not the only thing. We still need utility scale renewables. I absolutely believe that. And part of the reason for that is that we are extending the reach of clean electricity further than ever. It's not just things like electric high-speed rail, which Meta was asking about earlier, or electric vehicles, but also all these natural gas appliances now starting to transition over. This week, actually just yesterday at our monthly Energy Commission meeting, we put out the first statewide goal for electric heat pump technology. So we're calling for 6 million electric heat pumps in California by 2030. And we want to set, we set a goal for electric vehicles, and that was, done a few years ago, and that was really helpful in getting us to where we are now. And that was a 5 million goal by 2030. And we want to do that for electric heat pumps as well. So sort of long-winded, windy answer there, but I would just say, yeah, rooftop solar has been a very, very important part of the strategy. And just with respect to reliability, I just want to be clear, like there is nothing about grid reliability in a high renewables penetration scenario that is outside the realm of a solvable problem. Everything is solvable here. It's just different types of tools, as I mentioned, demand response and energy storage, and many other tools that are needed. But it's a totally solvable problem. I absolutely believe with every fiber in my being, we're going to get to 100% clean energy grid. It's absolutely feasible. The people who are skeptical, I have found in general in many forums in dealing with this, are generally not very up to speed on the classes of technology that are coming, right? We fund all these new, Sepion and Core Shell and Form and all the new cutting edge storage chemistries and demand response companies like Ohm Connect and stuff. And I think, when you're in that space and you see the strength of the innovation that's coming, it really gives you confidence. The folks I've found who are skeptical of this are typically coming out of more conventional sectors that are not really that exposed to the new technology trends that we're seeing in the market today.
It's incredibly helpful and a good rebuttal when we get these questions from, or a good piece of advice when we get these questions from our mayors who are fighting battles around this. And I think I'll succinctly say California is dealing with it. Look to them. I want to raise equity, but I want to make a quick point as well, because about transportation. I mean, electric vehicles are important, electric buses are important, but from the perspective of our members, dense cities built around a strong framework of public transport, walking and cycling are really critical. And the way we build our cities in the future has all sorts of impact on equity and affordability and climate. And so we're working very strongly on electric vehicles. Personally, I think fleets should be electrified rapidly, and I can't understand why people don't make it mandatory for the post office, for example, to change to EVs very quickly all over the Western world, but because they're available and they can centrally charge. But our cities are as much interested in ways of both densifying so that you can walk and cycle to where you need to go, and building around a core of public transport, because that's the lowest emission priority. And I would have been remiss if I didn't mention that point in the context of this conversation. You've mentioned equity a couple of times in jobs, particularly around low-income people, and I wanted to raise it in a couple of contexts. All of our mayor's climate plans address equity. We call it inclusivity because that's more of a global way to talk about this. But in North America, we use the words equity typically. and often are made in inclusive ways, in very strong consultation, particularly with low-income neighborhoods, so that people can say, here's our concern, which is often around air quality and the health impacts of air quality, which typically come from sources of greenhouse gases as well, a coal-fired plant, and are often about jobs. So the climate plans are designed in ways that also address health. London's program, Breathe London, we're trying to take global in addressing this, and are often about thinking about, as you implement your climate plan, how do you ensure that low-income people get the economic opportunity that comes from it, which includes training and other things that you've mentioned. Second, and by the way, part of London's strategy has been a congestion charge, which has been highly successful in lowering pollutants and greenhouse gas emissions in the core of London. But a second part of this is about just transition. There's an equitable impact on workers who are employed in fossil fuel industries, or more relevantly, I think, in other places that are dependent on fossil fuel industries. So, for example, what do you do about pipe fitters who work in apartment buildings that are heated and cooled by natural gas, when from a climate perspective, we need to electrify them? From an economic perspective, we need to find ways to make sure it's affordable. But there's no parallel job for people who are trained for that. And the work they would get might not be unionized, might not be as well paid, might not have benefits and pensions. And we've got several pilots to address this, including in South Africa. We're starting one in Los Angeles, one in Warsaw. South Africa, we're working with the unions and the national utility, which is all coal, as I'm sure you know better than me. Barcelona and Accra. But it's a tricky issue, because if you're a pipe fitter in apartment buildings and somebody comes along and says, I want to take out the pipes and you're not going to have a job, you're going to push back. And it's very understandable. And I'm just curious as to how...
David, why would anybody say take out the pipes? I don't get it.
Sorry, get natural gas pipes.
Oh, got it.
Right. If you're going to take out the natural gas and you're a pipe fitter who services the natural gas pipes in apartment buildings, and you're electrifying the building and taking away the gas from a climate perspective, that person's job's at risk. Sorry, Matt, I'm glad you said that, because everybody else listening didn't understand what it meant either. So I don't know, David. It's a tricky issue for everybody. What's California doing?
Yeah, no, it's a great point. I think the reality is that the energy industry evolves. And, I remember early on in my energy career, I snuck into a coal conference in Washington, D.C., and I sat in the back. I was just curious what these guys were saying. And, they were saying, we're going to have enough coal for 1,000 years, and coal's the future, and solar and wind and clean energy are irrelevant. And my goodness, look what's happened. Just in the U.S. in the last decade, coal was the majority of our electricity portfolio. Now it's less than 20% and falling. More coal got shut down under Trump than under Obama. He couldn't even stop it. He was a pro-coal president. And, the folks in the coal industry are having to transition. What I think the right thing to do is provide training and support and help those folks get into the energy industries of the future, which are solar and wind and storage and electric vehicles and that kind of thing. And we got to take care of those people. It's no fault of a coal miner that coal is falling out of favor and also can't compete economically anymore. And we have to take care of those folks. So I'm a big believer in the just transition approach. I think with respect to natural gas, you're sort of seeing the same process underway here, where there are major new investments being made in electrification, but huge opportunities. I mean, we have to build, as I said, over 1 million electric vehicle chargers. We need a workforce to do that. We need to install all these new electric technologies. And, so it's a lot of this is about targeted training. And I would say, just anecdotally, folks I've met, workers in the fossil fuel industry, there's great interest and passion for getting into clean energy industries. I personally met with oil workers, who are trying to get into the wind industry. I met with some of them who did make that transition. They love it. I just came back from a visit to the climate center. I was in Glasgow. Before that, I was visiting an offshore wind project in Portugal, and the developer of that, the guy had been developing coal power plants, and he was thrilled to get in to do offshore wind. And so, generally speaking, I think the workers in these fields want to be a part of the solution, and we just got to support the training to make that happen. Hey, unfortunately, Meta, I have a hard stop with I have a call with the White House here in a minute. I just really want to thank you for bringing us together. I'm sorry we talked your ear off there, David. It was a total pleasure to meet you. Thank you for everything you're doing. I look forward to being in touch.
David, the pleasure's all mine. You're doing great stuff. A real leader. Really appreciate it. I learned a ton. Thank you.
I'm just delighted with both of you and this fascinating conversation. So thank you both. Carry on.
Thanks, Meta.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Project Save the World produces one of these shows 3 days a week and sometimes more. This is episode 412. You can watch them or listen to them as audio podcasts on our website, tosavetheworld.ca. Eventually, we even post the transcripts there. And when you get to the website, please look around, because we have conversations going on there all the time about 6 global issues, plus potential reforms in governance, economics, and civil society. To find a particular talk show, enter its title or episode number in the search bar, or the name of one of the guest speakers. After you've watched or listened, scroll down and share your thoughts about the show with the other viewers. This is the place for dialogue, so please join in. See you there.